name is Salem Stull, and I am the current project coordinator for the Wyoming Institute for Humanities Research. In this video, I will be interviewing Dr. Breezy Taggart. Dr. Breezy Taggart is a professor at the UW's Honors College and will deliver this year's Sandeen Lecture in the Humanities. The title of Dr. Taggart's lecture is Reclaiming Mental Health Representations Through Contemporary Art. The Sandeen Lecture in the Humanities is named for Dr. Eric Sandeen, the founding director and now the director emeritus of the Wyoming Institute for Humanities Research. The lecture is co-sponsored by the Wyoming Institute as well as the Wyoming Humanities Council. The Sandeen Lecture takes place annually in December on the Monday of finals week during the fall semester. Each year, the faculty fellows in the cohort of the Institute's Humanities Research Group vote to decide on which fellow will deliver the lecture. Being chosen is a particular honor and demonstrates the respect of one's peers and showcases some of the best humanities research by UW faculty. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoy hearing about Dr. Taggart's research.
My name is Breezy Taggart, and I am an Honors College faculty member. I teach a number of upper division courses for the Honors College, and my background as an art historian I bring to those upper division classes. So I teach a number of classes that look at the intersection of art and medicine, as well as art and the environment. And then I also teach and lead a team of faculty who teach our first year curriculum in the Honors College, and that's called Colloquium. And Colloquium is a great place where honor students get to ask really big questions, and we come at those questions from a variety of different perspectives. So that's my role currently on campus, and then in January I'll start a new role as the Assistant Dean of the Honors College.
That's so exciting, congratulations!
Thank you.
You were nominated for the Sandeen Lecture, so I guess what is that lecture based off of? What project is that based off of?
It's based on a long study of my own of looking at this intersection between art and medicine. Art and mental illness is a subset of that, but I've long been interested in the ways in which art has interacted with the medical world and vice versa. Even if we look to some of the earliest examples of Leonardo da Vinci's anatomical studies, artists have long been interested in the body and representing the body, and so in that way there's long been this marriage between art and medicine that has really interesting implications for something like mental illness or health that often can be seen or viewed as invisible on the surface. And so using visual mediums to depict mental illness or health is really quite layered and complex.
What got you interested in this topic?
Well, many years ago, in early days of my graduate program, I was always interested in female artists, and so I often found myself following these female artists, and one particular artist, her name is Esther Bubbly. She's a photographer working generally in the 1940s and 50s as part of the Office of War Information government section. And so I was sitting in the Library of Congress archives looking at some of her prints and some of her photographs, and I suddenly found this collection of photographs that she did where she documented mental health institutions in the 1940s, and I just found them to be so profoundly evocative, and they seem to reverberate off the page and speak to me in such compelling ways that I found myself diving deep into that project and investigating the ways in which she was documenting and representing mental illness, and then found myself going down the rabbit hole of looking at representations of mental illness historically to see how she fits in that larger landscape. And so that was the very early impetus for me being interested in, well, how have we culturally represented mental illness? How do we do it? How do we do it in a sympathetic way? How do we do it in an accurate way? And how do we engage with the history of this representation? Because it's a long history, even though at the time when I saw these photographs, I had no idea of its long history. So that was the start.
How long have we even known about mental illness in the context of history versus like art, which has been happening forever?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it dates anciently, if we look to even specifically in the Western tradition, and we think about the Greeks, and we think about Hippocrates writing, he wrote of understanding mental disorders as being part of what's called the four humors, and that an imbalance of those humors could cause mental conditions. So it is fascinating how early all of this investigation into mental illness has occurred, and visual representations of that follow, as well as we look and engage with this history, how do we deconstruct some of the very problematic understandings of mental illness and health, as well as taking those understandings and then deconstruct visual imagery as well, and those misconceptions that are layered in the visual representation of it. It's fascinating to me.
So then what, do you focus on like a specific time period, or are you actually just trying to map like all of history?
Well, that would be so difficult, right. Obviously, and I wouldn't be able to do it justice. Most of what I study occurs in the 20th century, as well as contemporary artists working now. And particularly for the Sandeen Lecture, I'm going to focus on a couple of contemporary projects and artists that are working, in the last 10 years. But I also think looking to past historical representations allows us to put those in context and see how historical representations have these threads that connect to us, to what's being created today. How contemporary artists can take some of these stereotypes that can be harmful, that can be misrepresentative, and flip them on their head. Or how they can take the iconography that's used in the past and completely reject it. And so I think in this lecture, being able to focus on some of these really engaging contemporary artists, also want to explore a couple of examples to give folks an understanding of what has been represented in the past, and what are some of the symbolic and typical renderings of mental illness, and what appears in the iconography of mental illness, and then look at how it has shifted in some of these works that we'll look at from contemporary artists.
Can you mention just a few of the artists you might be mentioning in this lecture?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to look at a couple of different artists. One is Anna Schuleit Haber. She's an installation artist working in a variety of different mediums, but for this particular work that we'll look at together is an installation called Bloom from 2003. And it is a site-specific work that was meant to be experienced over a 4-day period, where 28,000 potted plants were brought to this mental health institution that was being closed to make way for a new institution. And to mark the commemoration of that closing, this artist used this experience as a way to mark a transition as well as healing. And using the medium of flowers is so evocative of health, of community support, of healing, and it's a wonderful language to use. And so we'll look to that artist. We'll also look at another particular project that involves a number of different artists, because it's a project that includes both patient and artist working together to create self-portraits, those who have suffered from mental illness. And this is a project born out of Pennsylvania, both in Perry County and Montgomery County. This project where artists and patient work together to create self-portraits that are intimate, that are realistic, that are raw of these individuals. And it's incredibly empowering to see the individual representing themselves. So those are a couple of the contemporary artists that we'll look to, and we'll also look to other artists historically to get a sense for how they engage with those contemporary artists. So we'll look to Francisco Goya. He does a particular work that depicts another institution and individuals in that institution, and then we'll look at another example of portraiture. French artist Theodore Géricault, who does a series of portraits, and having them in dialogue with a contemporary artist also producing portraits is just wonderfully stimulating to me. So we'll look at a couple of different artists, both historical and contemporary.
Interesting. Talking about those artists, it seems like a lot of them have to do with specifically mental institutions. Mm-hmm. Could you follow up on that? Because I mean, for me personally, I don't really think of the two together all the time in the modern day.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about the site of the mental health institution is it does become part of this fabric of historically representing the mentally ill individual. And the institution becomes the landscape behind the individual. And so using that and understanding it historically and the ways in which it became a symbol, both of mental illness itself, as well as a site of confinement, a site of othering. And then to see it being flipped in the context of these contemporary artists means these artists are using past language to then convey new understanding of what mental health can and should mean. While potentially we might not think and associate the institution with mental health today, it has been long associated with mental illness historically. And so we'll look at that as a site because it plays an important role in almost all of the artworks that we'll look at.
What is the most compelling thing you've discovered so far in your work?
I think it really comes down to a very broad takeaway, and not just related to representing mental health or illness, but any art that involves community or community engagement can have such a layered and profound result and experience. I'm finding as I continue to engage in these topics that when individuals and communities come together with artists, something new is created through collaboration. Suddenly the meaning behind that experience is so profound, and that has been applicable across a lot of different themes, not just mental health, but other themes as well.
It's very interesting that you point that out because I don't think that specifically is something ever really discussed. Mental illness, at least in the United States, is a very solo individualist thing, but I find that interesting that these artists incorporate the ideas of community in that.
Well, and that's what's so exciting about it is thinking through what kinds of mediums can incorporate or rely on community in the same ways that an individual who is navigating the difficulties or challenges that one faces when getting some sort of diagnosis, how do they resemble each other, right? And when they do, what happens? And I, so far, am seeing the artists that try to resemble or echo the ways in which community surrounds a person to help support in healing, support in navigating difficult waters. The artworks created are just wonderfully layered as well as meaningful.
So why do you think this discussion specifically you're going to have at the Sandeen Lecture is important?
Well, one is if you look at any statistics from CDC, from World Health Organization, 1 in 5 individuals will experience mental illness at some point or in any given year. And so it's an issue that is incredibly prevalent. And I have always seen, as my study as an art historian, that art has always been in the mix in trying to tackle our toughest problems, our toughest challenges, and sometimes it has the language to do so. Maybe we're unable to express some of the challenges or work through some of the challenges that we face. And so I see art as part of the solution. And so, I've long seen art and medicine as having this dialogue. This kind of discussion as being incredibly important. If we can start to use art as a way forward, as one of the ways forward, it can't be the only one, right? But if it's part of the conversation in terms of thinking through how we help support and understand mental health and illness, I think we might have increased understanding. And that seems like a worthy goal.
What books would you recommend to people who are interested in this topic?
Yeah, good question. So some of the more historical overviews, which I think are fascinating and help place some of the work going on now in a really particular lens, are an early work by Sandra Gilman. This is from the 1980s called Seeing the Insane. And then another work by Jane Crom, who looks at the art in public spaces, and it's called The Art of Public Frenzy. Both are historical overviews of the ways in which mental illness and health have been represented. So those are particularly interesting, but there's a number of other texts that are also really interesting in terms of considering just the intersection of art and medicine. So one is The Art of Medicine by Julie Anderson, and Emma Barnes and Emma Shackleton. It's filled with images, and so it's a ton of fun. And then, a couple here also look more specifically at a couple of different historical time periods. But one I'll point to that is much more broad, but includes so many wonderful themes about the body, is this Themes of Contemporary Art. And it's actually by two authors that have been to the University of Wyoming, one Jean Robertson and Craig McDaniel. This is a text that looks at visual art since 1980, and its treatment of contemporary art is very thematic. And so it investigates representations of the body in various ways, and has a lot of connections to the ways in which I'll investigate contemporary art in the Sandeen Lecture.
All right. Well, thank you so much for speaking with me. I'm so excited to hear your talk this December 12th, 2022. And thank you so much for watching. If you're interested in seeing some of the Institute's other lectures and interviews, feel free to do so on our YouTube channel. For more information about our organization, you should join our mailing list at www.uwyo.edu/humanities. We always appreciate it when you like, comment, or subscribe. Thank you!